Greetings and welcome back to yet another episode of the Daily Run, and today we're playing as the locksmith master himself, Kane of course, and we're off to a very interesting start with Papula Duplex, and it's an item that I would feel not a lot of people really pay a lot of respect to, but in my opinion it's actually a really decent item. First of all, I just like spectral tears or effects in general, because they allow you to shoot enemies that are hiding behind rocks, and that allows you to be just a little bit safer and just a little bit meticulous with how you actually approach certain rooms and how you shoot them. I think it makes it for a much easier time whenever you can kind of angle your shots properly. You don't even have to worry about any obstacles, and you can just shoot right through that, and that's a huge bonus for me. And I would feel like even if it was just a regular Ouija board, and if that was just a regular item, that would still be very good in my opinion, just because it does give you that safety net, and it allows you to be just a little bit safer than you would be otherwise. Of course, if you know how to use it properly, then you can really do a lot of things with it. And maybe the biggest problem with me is that I kind of rely on obstacles or the environment to stop enemies sometimes, and for that reason I do know the enemy patterns and how they're gonna come at me, which means I try to hide behind the rocks or whatever, so I can kind of push them away. But of course, when you have spectral tears, you don't have to do that anymore, because suddenly you can just use those obstacles as not obstacles, but those rocks as natural obstacles, and still shoot enemies through the other side. So I would always try to position myself in a way where I could still shoot the enemies, but they wouldn't be able to shoot me. And I think the most apparent example of this is, I think, this floor or maybe the next one, when I'm fighting Peep. And it was that room layout where there's Peep in the middle, and there's two lines of rocks left and to the right of him. And what you do essentially in that position is you just stay to the left or just stay to the right, and you shoot him over the walls, and he can't jump to you, because even if he does jump to you, the way his padding works, he will always go where he would normally could go, so he can't jump over rocks, for example. But also, if he does do any of his attacks, like drop P on the ground or shoot you with his P tiers or whatever they are, they can't get you, because you're still hidden behind the rock, and of course you're out of range of all of that. And it just creates a much better way to fight him, and you can see that this is exactly what I'm talking about. I'm basically not in any danger at all. The only thing I have to watch out for are the two eyes that are bouncing around, and even then I can control somewhat if I just shoot them or if I just stand in the right spot. So in my book, Papula Duplex is great, and not only because of the spectral tears, but also because you do have that increased hitbox, and it's just much easier to finagle and angle your shots in a way to deal the maximum amount of damage. And of course, as we went through this run, we also got some other things which helped a lot. And I would say that early on, Roid Rage, is it called Roid Rage? I'm not sure if it's called Roid Rage. And the green syringe, which gives you speed and the range upgrade, it's great, because I think it almost caps out Kane's speed, which means you're essentially moving as fast as possible. And whenever you have a weak run, having a lot of speed is pretty important, just because there's a lot of backtracking to be had usually in Isaac, which means you kind of have to go back from the rooms that you've already been to, and for that reason having a lot of speed means you're cutting down on that time. It's not a significant amount of time in total, but it definitely does add up over time, and when that happens, I just feel like it's a much better way to play the game. And of course, when you have high speed, it's also much easier to dodge. I find that there's a sweet spot of dodging, at least for me, that's something like 1.5 to 1.6 speed, and I think over that just gives me too much velocity, as sometimes I end up sliding into enemies or projectiles, so that's kind of unfortunate. But it's nicer to be fast than slow, because when you're slow, you have to do that reactive type of dodging. You can't just dodge based on your reflexes. You have to know where you can stand and where you cannot, depending on the enemies that are in the room, and of course in which attacks you can. And if you're just slow in some situations, you just can't dodge some attacks, and that's always a bummer. But as we went on, we got some of these nice items like Roid Rage, and later on we got Technology Zero. And Technology Zero on its own actually isn't that great, or at least it wasn't in this case. I feel like it would be a lot better if our tear rate was higher or lower, I guess, depending on how you look at it. But it didn't. 10, which is the default, it really didn't do much. There's some way to angle your shots so you can kind of maximize the duration of that laser sticking to the enemy, and that can deal quite a lot of damage, but in most cases it's pretty insignificant. I guess the only thing that it's useful for is the ability to hit multiple enemies and not only just one, and I feel like that creates a good environment to learn maybe to angle your shots, because suddenly when you try to maximize your damage with this item, you can't shoot directly at the enemy, but but you have to angle your shots in a way so they stay on the screen for the longest, but you also have to shoot them with such a spacing in between that the arc between them stays on the enemy as long as possible. And it's actually quite difficult, but it's also one of those items which really can change based on how you play the game. But I like that it's not restrictive as opposed to something like maybe technology, just regular technology, because while that does change how you play the game, there's no way to turn it out. But there are some items like technology 0 or maybe even the lump of coal which just give you a benefit and you can use it if you want. So in this case the lasers, it's nice to have it always active because there's no downside to it. But if you don't want to kind of finagle with the range or maybe how you angle your shots, you can just rely on your regular tears and you don't actually have to think about it. And that's what I like about these items, because they give you a new dimension to how you shoot and play, but they're not restrictive and they don't zone you in on that, and I guess that's what I'm trying to say. And Technology 0, obviously being the item that it is, it actually does have a lot of fun synergies, and I think the biggest one is the one that not the biggest one, but the most influential one in this particular run is the one I got with Io Belial, or Possessed Tears, I think, and I get them, I think, on this level deal, or maybe the next level deal, and it's such a stupid combo, because what happens is, usually the problem is that when your tears hit an enemy, they just cease to exist, but the problem is, if they could go through the enemy, then that laser arc would still follow them, and then that would deal some damage over time, and of course that would be really damaging. But in this particular case, when you have Possessed Tears, not only do they go through the enemies, but your shots start to home in again, which means that they kind of stay on a target for much longer than expected, and when you shoot a few of them at once, then you just create a lot of lasers which also deal additional amount of damage, and it's almost like you get something like a triple damage upgrade, and it's just a sick combo. I didn't really expect it to be, I knew it was gonna be good, but I mainly picked them up for those penetrative shots aspect, because I was intending to fight Harsh, which means that I would need some form of crowd control, so I thought that maybe in that particular case the Possessed Tears would have been good, and it turned out to be much better than expected. I really can't harp on it too much. It's one of those combos which you would think works well, but then when you get it you realize it's actually busted and extremely broken. I feel like if you just have the base damage, the Technology 0 and Possessed Tears, that's already enough for you to pretty much win the game, and that's saying a lot. And of course maybe that's ignoring some of the facts, or maybe fighting some of the bosses like Harsh or whatever, or maybe even Delirium, but overall it's such a strong combo, and you'll see just what I mean when I get it here. Thankfully, up until this point, I didn't struggle too much. I mean, it was a very difficult, not a difficult run, I would say a tedious run, just because there were no DPS upgrades, but luckily all of that changed with just this. And I think it's very telling, because up until this point I took 34 minutes to come here, but I finished the rest of the run in 15 minutes, which is basically the minority of this entire video, which is interesting, because Isaac really is the kind of game where you just get one particular item and everything changes. And this floor was just not sacramental, but life-changing, because we got all the DPS upgrades, we got Possessed Tears, we got some DPS upgrades in the terms of the screw, which just increased or reduced our tear delay, and we're just able to kind of pop off from here. And at this point we're actually extremely strong, and combine that with the fact that I said Mama Mega, which I bought earlier so I could get the Harsh, just means that we're basically no danger at all, and we're pretty much guaranteed to get the Harsh, and of course then beat him as well, because now we do have penetrative shots and our damage is somewhat decent, which means we can deal with the enemies that he spawns, and because we're fast enough, we also don't have to worry about the tornadoes or the cyclones or whatever that he spawns, which are usually pretty much a death sentence if you're not fast enough, but we are, so we're kind of good on all of those different aspects. And that's what I like about the Harsh fight, because there are a few things that you kind of have to think about before you go fight him, or at least there's a list or maybe a set of prerequisites which are important to fulfill if you want to have a nice time fighting him. And in this particular case, I feel like we checked all of those off the list, and now we can actually just fight him and win. And in this case, because it was such a strong run, I actually didn't even get hit once, which is always a good sign. Whenever you can fight the Harsh and not get hit once, that's usually pretty decent. It did surprise me that I didn't get hit because I had the soul item, and what the soul item does, as you might know, is of course it deflects tears away from you, and when he does start channeling his continuum tears, and if you're close to him, or at least in the position that I stand, the tears can actually get bounced away from you, and they can enter at very different and weird angles, which just increase the chance of you getting hit. So I was surprised I didn't get hit here, because that usually happens, and because they travel at a very high velocity, especially after you bounce them around, the soul item doesn't have enough time to deflect them again, and for that reason you just get hit a few times. But luckily in this particular case I did get lucky and I wasn't hit at all. And at this point, there's really not much to say. We even got the mulligan, which is just kind of icing on the cake, and we're just kind of popping off from this situation. Obviously, it would have been much more ideal if I did get to boss rush in the first place. I thought maybe I should use the Mama Mega in that case just to get the boss rush, and hoped that there was a really strong item, especially after I got the Emperor card. I thought it was the right decision because the Emperor card would have then allowed me to get the Hush, and looking back at it, I think it would be a pretty good idea. But considering I missed, or not missed, but I completed the Wombo, not the Wombo one, but the Mount floor at around 30 minutes, I feel like I wouldn't have enough time. But then again, I'm not really sure. Maybe if I used both the Emperor card and the Mama Mega, and I would be able to actually get to boss rush in time, and if there was a really strong item in there, then maybe from that point on I could make it a Harsh, but I'm not really sure. And kind of wagering all of your chances on 1 or 2 good items, I feel like is a bit detrimental to the overall health of the game. I just feel like the odds are not in our favor, and for that reason I decided not to go there. I just went to Harsh, I did Harsh, I got those 5,000 points, I completed the entirety of the run, and I finished with a very comfortable 45,000 points, which is actually pretty decent. I remember when I first started playing the dailies, and if I did get a 45,000 points score, I actually was really excited, because usually my damage penalty was a lot higher and my item penalty as well, but of course with time I've learned to optimize it a little bit, and now even if I don't make it to one of those rushes just because I don't take as much damage as I used to, I still have a relatively decent score, and I still end up ranking in a relatively decent place, which is pretty nice. It was a fun run. I did enjoy how seeing some of these new synergies which really didn't show up before. Obviously we didn't have the booster pack before, but just seeing one of those new items in action with an item that already existed prior to that and see them synergize is always what makes me happy in Isaac. And I feel like there should be more dailies which showcase, not showcase, but they just give us more crazy synergies that we haven't seen before, which just kind of showcase the power of the items, or maybe even the absurdity of the items. Sometimes you get 2 items which really don't work well together, and that's exciting as well. I hope you enjoyed this one, guys, and I hope to see you next time.